A German shepherd waited 3 days in the cold December rain. Outside a candy shop no one visits anymore. He didn't bark, he didn't move. He just waited, until a young officer found a note tucked in his collar, and everything changed. Why would a child abandon her best friend right before Christmas? And what kind of man takes in a dog that no longer trusts the world? Stay with us until the end. Even the quietest hearts will find something they've long forgotten. And tell me, have you ever been left behind, but still hoped someone would come back? Drop your story in the comments. You never know who needs to hear it. Franklin, Tennessee. Early December. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. It wasn't heavy, not the kind that made news or filled ditches, but the kind that lingered. A soft, persistent drizzle that clung to rooftops and blurred the edges of buildings. The bricks of Main Street glistened like old leather, wet and worn smooth by time. Street lamps cast long reflections in shallow puddles, the yellow glow broken now and then by the hush of passing tires or the echo of distant footsteps. At the far corner of the street, where the slope began to dip toward the old post office, stood Dawson's Sweet Corner, a candy shop that smelled of cinnamon and warm sugar, even through the mist. The striped awning sagged slightly with moisture, and behind its glass window, jars of rock candy and brittle toffee sat untouched, dulled by the grayness outside. And outside that window, unmoving, was the German shepherd. He was large, not just tall but solid, the kind of dog that once had muscle and strength, now softened by rain and hunger. His coat, once black and rust-colored, had dulled into streaks of ash and dark clay, and the fur along his belly clung to ribs that showed more each day. His right hind leg bore a scar, long, raised, like something old and badly healed. One ear bent slightly at the tip, giving him a lopsided look, though nothing about him felt light. He didn't bark, he didn't whimper, he simply stood, always facing the candy shop door. On the first morning, Henry Dawson had thought the dog was lost. On the second, he wondered if it belonged to one of the out-of-town construction crews. But by the third morning, when Henry opened the shop and saw the animal in the same place, unmoved, soaked, hollow-eyed, something shifted in him. Henry was 71. He ran the shop alone. His wife had passed 15 winters ago, and since then, the only warmth in his life came from the copper kettles and the children who pressed coins against his counter. He grumbled often about sticky floors, noisy teenagers, and how peppermint wasn't peppermint anymore. But beneath the old man's sighs and stained apron was a loneliness that settled in deep and quiet, like dust behind forgotten shelves. That morning, he placed a chipped ceramic bowl outside the door, filled it with water, and set a slice of leftover cornbread beside it. The shepherd sniffed once, drank sparingly, then turned back to face the shop. He did not touch the bread. Later, Henry tried again. Boiled chicken this time, still warm. The dog licked at it once but barely chewed. His eyes, a deep brown edged with amber, stayed fixed on the door as though willing it to open by thought alone. By dusk, the sidewalk had turned slick, reflecting the twinkle lights strung across Main Street in anticipation of the town's winter fair. Still, the shepherd remained, his breath fogged faintly in the cold. When a child walked by with her mother, clutching a red umbrella, the dog flinched but didn't move. He simply adjusted his weight from one paw to the other and resumed his silent watch. Inside the shop, Henry stood behind the counter, his hand resting on the glass where fudge and caramels sat untouched. He watched the shepherd for a long time. At some point, he forgot about closing up. He simply watched. Rain tapped steadily against the awning. The town quieted around them. Across the street, behind lace curtains, neighbors noticed. A few took photos, others whispered, but no one approached. There was something sacred in the stillness, something that warned against interference. This was no ordinary stray. He wasn't waiting for food or shelter. He was waiting for something he believed would return, something that hadn't yet understood it was gone. And so the shepherd stood, unbothered by the rain or the cold, his eyes locked on a door that hadn't opened in days, unwilling or unable to believe it wouldn't open again. That night, when Henry flipped the sign to closed and turned off the lights, he paused. The shepherd was still there, now lying down, his head resting on his paws, body curled toward the doorway like a memory. Henry stared at him through the glass. Then he reached behind the counter for a folded blanket, one his wife had knitted long ago in creams and pale blues, and opened the door. The dog didn't lift his head, but when Henry gently placed the blanket nearby, he saw the shepherd shift ever so slightly to touch its edge with his side. The rain continued. The wind whispered down the empty street, and under the soft glow of the candy shop's neon sign, a dog waited, alone, but not forgotten. And somewhere inside that stillness, a story had begun, not with words, but with waiting. The call came in just after 7 a.m., when the mist was still clinging to the tops of the hills and the streets were glazed with leftover night. Officer Lucas Grant was pouring coffee into an enamel mug in his kitchen, boots unlaced, eyes heavy from another night of unrest. His police radio crackled like it always did, full of minor complaints, flickering street lamps, a mailbox tipped by wind, someone's dog barking too long. But this time, the dispatcher's voice carried a curious thread of concern. "Got a call from Dawson's Sweet Corner," she said. "Same dog's been sitting out front for days. Owner says it hasn't moved. Something feels off." Lucas set the mug down without sipping and pulled his jacket from the hook by the door. The house around him remained still, save for the quiet hum of the heater. His cabin sat on the edge of the tree line, 5 miles outside town, surrounded by pine and fog. It was built for two once. Now it was only his. The second coffee cup stayed in the cabinet, the second toothbrush dry in the drawer, her photo still on the shelf, her voice long gone from the rooms. Lucas drove slowly down the winding road toward town, tires hissing over wet asphalt. He kept the window cracked slightly, letting in the sharp bite of cold, the kind that burned the lungs awake. As Franklin emerged from the mist, familiar and quiet, he spotted the candy shop at the far end of Main Street. And there, just as the call described, was the shepherd. Lucas parked across the street and stepped out. The dog didn't move. He watched from beneath heavy lids, rain still slicking the tufts behind his ears, chest rising slow and steady. Lucas approached with deliberate calm, the way he might approach someone on a ledge. When he reached the edge of the sidewalk, he stopped. "Hey, buddy," he said, voice soft, almost too soft to carry in the wind. The shepherd blinked. Then, slowly, he stood. No growl, no fear. He took a step forward, and before Lucas could brace for it, the dog pressed his forehead gently into his open palm. Lucas froze. It wasn't the gesture itself that stilled him. It was the memory it triggered. Years ago, his younger brother Mark had done the same thing. Just after returning from deployment, shaken and changed, Mark would lean his forehead into Lucas's shoulder in silence, a wordless ask for grounding, for home. And now here was this animal, soaked and trembling, offering the same broken kind of trust. Lucas knelt, The shepherd leaned harder, but his legs wobbled slightly. That's when Lucas noticed the collar. Cracked leather, frayed at the edges. Tied to its ring with a piece of blue yarn was something faded and folded, tucked tightly like a secret. He eased it out, shielding it from the rain with his hand, and unfolded it beneath the glow of the street lamp. It was a scrap of notebook paper, creased and smudged, the ink running in places. The handwriting was uneven, hesitant, but the words struck clean. "Please take care of him. He didn't do anything wrong. I'm sorry. H." Lucas stared at it. The H was looped awkwardly, the way a child might sign their name. His breath caught, not in fear, but in something older. Grief, maybe, or that quiet ache that comes from recognizing something too late. He folded the paper again, hands trembling slightly, and slipped it back into the knot. The dog watched him the entire time, not with desperation, but with a patience that felt unbearable. Across the street, the lights in the candle shop flickered on. The baker's van rolled past. The world continued, unaware that something sacred had just passed between a man and a dog in the gray hush of morning. Lucas didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. He stood, wiped his palm on his pant leg, and motioned slightly toward the cruiser. To his surprise, the dog followed. No leash, no hesitation. He moved slowly, as if every step hurt. Lucas opened the back door. The shepherd climbed in, turned once, then curled into the seat, head resting on his front paws. Lucas stood for a long moment before closing the door. There would be paperwork. There would be questions. But for now, there was only this: two souls who had lost too much, quietly agreeing to carry a little of each other's burden for one more day. By the time Lucas turned off the main road and onto the gravel path that led to his cabin, the drizzle had softened into a fine mist that clung to the windshield like breath. Pine trees flanked both sides, their needles dark with damp, their limbs heavy with the weight of weather. The cruiser rumbled up the short incline and came to a stop beside the porch, headlights catching on the patch of stacked firewood and the single rocking chair that hadn't been moved in weeks. Inside the cabin, the air was cool and dry, touched faintly by the scent of old wood and whatever dust hadn't been disturbed since his last shift. Lucas left the door cracked behind him, then circled to the back of the vehicle. The shepherd hadn't moved much. He lifted his head as Lucas opened the door, blinked slowly, then rose with the kind of care that came from hunger and long-standing aches. Lucas stepped back to give space, and the dog eased himself down onto the gravel, paws spreading like he needed to feel the earth under him again. Then, without cue or command, he padded toward the open door and crossed the threshold into Lucas's home. He didn't wander. He didn't sniff furniture or corners. He walked forward with quiet intention and sat down at the doorway of Lucas's bedroom, facing in, not looking at Lucas, not looking at the kitchen or the crackling stove or the warm patch of rug where most dogs would have curled. He simply settled there, back straight, gaze fixed on the dark opening of the room, as if waiting for someone else to appear. Lucas watched him from the kitchen, one hand wrapped around the kettle handle, the other bracing the counter. He didn't speak. The dog wasn't asking for food. He wasn't restless or expectant. He had made himself a sentinel, not for the house, but for whatever haunted the space within it. The tea boiled. Lucas poured it into a chipped mug and sat at the small table by the window. Outside, the fog curled through the trees like smoke. Inside, the silence pressed close. That night, Lucas didn't sleep. He lay beneath an old wool blanket, staring at the ceiling's wooden beams, counting their uneven gaps. The shadows shifted as the wind moved outside. Somewhere past midnight, the familiar sound returned. The dream that never stayed buried. Tires skidding, metal folding. Mark's voice distant and full of fear. Then silence. Always silence. Lucas jerked awake, breath shallow, soaked in sweat. The room was cold. His hands trembled where they gripped the blanket. Then he heard it. A low, almost imperceptible sound. Not a bark, not a growl, but something softer. A whine. Just once, then quiet. He sat up slowly, the blanket falling from his shoulders, and turned toward the doorway. There, just outside the frame, the shepherd sat, still alert, still facing inward. But now his ears had perked, and his eyes, those deep, storm-colored eyes, watched Lucas with quiet understanding. He didn't move, just sat, just watched, as if guarding more than a room, as if standing watch over the fault lines in another man's soul. Lucas swung his legs over the edge of the bed and leaned forward, elbows on knees. For a long time, neither of them moved. By morning, the cabin felt different. Not warmer, not louder, but occupied, in a way that didn't feel intrusive. Lucas brewed coffee. The shepherd, still unnamed in his mind, lay near the hearth, his body curled tightly but not uneasily. When Lucas placed a bowl of water near him, the dog rose, drank, then returned to his post. He wasn't looking to be entertained. He wasn't asking to be comforted. He was simply present. Later that day, Lucas took him outside. The sun broke briefly through the cloud cover, casting long streaks of pale gold over the frost-glazed grass. The dog moved slowly at first, careful with his weight, sniffing patches of earth and pine needles as if trying to remember the world. At the edge of the clearing, he stopped and looked back at Lucas, not as if waiting for instruction, but as if checking that the man had not vanished. Lucas stood with his hands in his pockets, coat zipped to the collar. He met the dog's eyes, and without knowing why, spoke aloud for the first time since bringing him home. "You don't act like a stray." The shepherd didn't respond, of course, but his tail shifted once across the grass, slow and deliberate, like a page being turned without hurry. Back inside, Lucas pulled an old blanket from the closet and laid it near the fireplace. The dog sniffed it, then lay down, not curled, but stretched, chest rising, breath steady, a quiet kind of claim. Lucas sat again at the kitchen table, the note from the collar unfolded beside his coffee. The words stared up at him. "Please take care of him. He didn't do anything wrong. I'm sorry." Lucas read them over and over, his thumb tracing the edge of the paper, worn and creased. There was something about the way the S leaned, the hesitation in the loops, a child's hand, a goodbye written too early. He glanced at the shepherd, now sleeping soundly near the heat, and for the first time in a long time, the cabin no longer felt like a place built to keep the world out. It felt faintly like the beginning of something that wanted in. By the end of the week, the German shepherd had become a quiet rumor threaded into the rhythm of Franklin. His presence, like the cold, was not loud or immediate, but it settled deep into everything, into the steam that rose from coffee shop mugs, into the nods exchanged between clerks and mailmen, into the glances people gave one another before saying his name. They didn't call him by a name at first. He was just the dog, or that shepherd, or the one who waited outside Dawson's. But they remembered him, especially the older folks, the ones who had seen enough seasons to know when something didn't fit into the usual churn of life. At Norma Jean's candle shop, a tiny storefront wedged between the barber and the old soda fountain, customers leaned in close to ask about him. Norma, 68, with her long gray braid and paint-flecked apron, had seen him before, weeks ago, maybe longer. She remembered the girl who walked him, a slender thing, hair always a little unbrushed, shoes too thin for the weather. They came in on Saturdays, always after noon. The girl never bought much, just a single red cinnamon candle, sometimes a matchbook if she had the change. But the dog waited at the door, always sitting, always watching. She loved that candy shop, Norma told a customer as she lit a sample wick near the counter. She'd hold his leash like it was the last rope between her and the wind. Others remembered too. Alma Briggs, who worked part-time at the diner, recalled seeing the same pair on cold mornings by the benches near the courthouse square. The girl shared muffins with the shepherd, tearing them into pieces, always saving the last bite for him. No one knew where she lived. No one thought to ask. She wasn't trouble, just a soft presence, like fog in the early hours. Lucas heard these stories without asking. He didn't prod, didn't interview. The town volunteered them. People seemed to offer fragments like puzzle pieces, unsure of the picture but sensing that he might know where to place them. He'd begun walking the shepherd down Main Street each evening just before closing time. Not because the dog needed it, he moved slowly, still favoring one side, but because the act itself seemed to still something in Lucas. They passed the bakery, where a bell tinkled every time the door opened. They passed the mural behind City Hall, where children had once painted their names in handprints, now faded with time. And they always passed Dawson's. The candy shop had cleaned its windows since that first morning. A garland now hung across the awning. But the step where the dog had waited remained bare, untouched, like a gravestone no one dared to disturb. Henry Dawson stepped out one evening as Lucas passed with the shepherd. He didn't speak at first, just stood, arms folded, apron powdered with sugar, eyes unreadable. Then, he didn't even blink for 3 days. Lucas nodded, didn't bark, didn't growl, just waited, like he knew the door would open eventually. Lucas kept his eyes on the dog, who paused near the stoop but didn't linger. "That kind of waiting," he said, "doesn't come from hunger." Henry looked down at the shepherd, who stood like a statue, his gaze not on the shop this time, but toward the sky. Clouds tinged faintly lavender as evening fell. "Something was left unfinished," Henry murmured. "He's still holding the thread." Later that night, Lucas sat on his porch with a blanket over his knees, a mug cooling in his hands. The shepherd lay nearby, head resting on his crossed paws, eyes open but still. Lucas found himself thinking about the girl. Not her name, which no one seemed to know yet, but the shape of her story, the empty spot she'd left behind in the town's memory, the way people spoke of her, not like she'd vanished, but like she'd been misplaced, like something important had slipped just out of reach. He remembered how the dog had pressed into his hand, as if asking not to be sent back, how he'd curled outside Lucas's room without invitation, how he didn't eat at first, not until the silence between them had settled into something more bearable. Lucas rose, fetched the note from where he kept it tucked between pages of a forgotten book. He read it again beneath the porch light. The ink was faded, the paper soft, but the words remained. "Please take care of him. He didn't do anything wrong. I'm sorry." He folded it slowly, tucking it back, then looked out across the yard where the fog had begun to creep in again, low and deliberate. The town remembered her, and the dog remembered her. And now, whether he meant to or not, so did he. Inside, the house waited, silent, but not empty. And just outside its walls, the shepherd stood up, stretched, then stepped quietly toward the door. Not as a guest, not as a pet, but as something else, something returning to its post, something faithful to what had been lost. On the fourth morning, Lucas woke earlier than usual. The light had not yet crept past the horizon, and the cabin was still cloaked in its own quiet, a kind of hush that felt sacred, not empty. He lay still for a moment, listening. The familiar sounds were there, the wind slipping through the pine branches outside, the faint creak of the floorboards as they settled with the change in temperature. And one more, the slow rhythm of breathing near the bedroom door. Not human, steady, present. The shepherd was there just as he had been each morning before, not pressed close but near enough. Lucas swung his legs over the edge of the bed, the cold floor biting at his soles, and walked past the dog without speaking. In the kitchen, he filled a kettle and set it on the stove, then glanced toward the window, where condensation clouded the view, behind the film of fog. The woods waited, still gray with the last of fall, bare branches rising like questions with no easy answers. He turned to find the shepherd had followed, now sitting beside the small table, ears relaxed, tail motionless. Lucas reached for a bowl and set it down, then opened the refrigerator and pulled out what was left of the roast chicken from 2 nights ago. He tore a piece free, the meat pale and cold in his hands, and placed it gently in the bowl. The shepherd sniffed, then lowered his head and began to eat. Not ravenous, not rushed, just quiet acceptance. It was then Lucas saw it. Not just the way the dog favored one side, but the faint twist in his movement, the way his back leg faltered slightly when he shifted weight. As the dog finished, Lucas crouched slowly, careful not to startle. He reached out, palm open, and touched the flank gently. Beneath his fingers, the shepherd flinched. Just once, then stilled. Lucas's hand moved along the dog's side, searching until it found the scar. Long, raised, not recent, a surgical line. He traced it carefully, not with curiosity, but with recognition. It was the kind of mark a body earned by surviving something that should have taken it down. Lucas had his own, not visible, but they matched in kind. Later that morning, he called the town's small veterinary clinic. It had changed hands twice since he'd last been inside, but someone still answered the phone. Dr. Patel, the younger vet now in charge, offered to check the files. "We don't tag strays here," she said, "but if he ever had surgery, we might have a record." Her voice was efficient, warm but guarded, the voice of someone used to both loss and logistics. Lucas gave a basic description. German Shepherd, male, scar on the right hind leg. Dr. Patel promised to call back. It wasn't even 2 hours later that she did. "There's a file," she said, "from about 8 months ago. Emergency surgery. Dog came in with a deep gash. Looked like barbed wire or broken glass. Brought in by a girl. Said her name was Harper Quinn. Age listed as 11. No adult with her. She paid cash. Not enough. But she came back 3 times with the rest. Sold cookies in the square, we think. Paid it off in full." Lucas stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear, watching the shepherd lying by the hearth. The name clung to the air. "Do you have an address?" he asked. "South side of town," Patel said, "but I think they moved. House looked shut up last time I passed." Lucas wrote it down anyway. When he hung up, he stood still for a moment, letting the silence stretch around him like wool. Then he moved. He drove slowly through the older part of Franklin. The houses smaller here, paint peeled in places, fences leaning, front steps weathered soft by time. The address led to a narrow single-story home, at the edge of the last cul-de-sac, before the trees thickened again. The front yard was brown with frost, the windows dark. A rusted mailbox leaned sideways, the flag broken. Lucas parked and stepped out. The air was sharp with cold, and his boots crunched faintly over the gravel drive. He approached the porch, each step deliberate, and tried the door. Locked. But the lock wasn't the kind people replaced. It was old, brass, scratched, as if no one had turned it in months. He peered through the front window. The inside was stripped bare, furniture gone. A child's coat still hung from a peg by the door. A small ceramic dish sat on the windowsill, pink, shaped like a cat. A sticker clung to it, worn but legible. Harper's Treats. Lucas felt something sink in his chest. He stepped back, scanning the yard. Near the porch, half buried in leaves, was a plastic bracelet. Bright blue, the kind sold in packs at gas stations. He picked it up carefully, brushing off dirt. The elastic had stretched. A single-letter bead dangled loose. H. That night, back at the cabin, Lucas didn't speak. He sat on the floor near the hearth while the shepherd lay nearby, eyes half shut. The bracelet sat on the table beside the folded note. The room felt full, not of people, but of echoes, of things once said and left behind. Lucas stared into the fire until it blurred, his hand resting lightly on the shepherd's back. The dog didn't move, but his tail flicked once, just once, against the rug, like a thread tugging softly at the edge of something not yet mended. The following morning brought no sun. Just a dull, pewter light pressed low against the windows and the kind of cold that sank straight into wood. Lucas stood at the kitchen sink, coffee untouched beside him, staring out at the line of pines that bordered his land. The shepherd, Atlas, he had started calling him that silently, lay by the doorway, chin on paws, watching the same trees. The girl had a name now. Harper Quinn, and a trail, barely there but traceable. The address hadn't been a dead end. It was a doorway half closed, and something inside Lucas stirred with a kind of quiet insistence. He couldn't stop at a locked door. Not this time. He spent the morning calling around, pulling at threads that most people didn't even remember they'd left behind. Eventually, someone at the school board office recalled the Quinns. Not much detail, just that Harper had transferred out mid-year. No forwarding address, but they gave him the name of a next of kin listed in the file. Mavis Quinn, aunt, Springfield. Lucas had been to Springfield only a few times, smaller than Franklin, quieter, with streets that curved like they'd followed old paths made by foot, not by plan. He found the house after asking around at a local bakery. It sat low on its lot, with a sloped roof and faded yellow siding, a porch held up by more will than lumber. The garden was wild, left to itself. Wind chimes moved without sound. He parked at the curb. Atlas stirred in the back seat, eyes alert. Lucas gave a small nod, almost without meaning to, then stepped out and walked toward the porch. The woman who answered the door was in her early 60s, though life had worn her down faster than time. She had tired eyes and thin wrists, and she leaned heavily on a wooden cane wrapped in tape. Her silver hair was pulled into a knot that had started to fall loose. She looked at Lucas like she'd seen too many uniforms knock on too many doors. "You're here about Harper," she said. It wasn't a question. Lucas nodded once. "Mavis Quinn?" She opened the door a little wider, not as an invitation, but as a weary concession. "You'd better come in. I can't stand long." The house smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. There was a hider rattling somewhere down the hall, and stacks of newspapers lined the corners like bricks holding the place up. They sat in a small living room, Lucas on the edge of a corduroy chair, Mavis in a recliner that groaned as she eased into it. "She brought that dog here," Mavis began, voice thin but steady. "After her parents died, my sister and her husband, car wreck. Harper was all bones when she arrived. Wouldn't speak for a week. The dog was the only thing she clung to. Slept curled up beside him on the floor, even when I offered the bed." Lucas didn't interrupt. He didn't write anything down. He only listened. "I tried," Mavis continued, "but my heart isn't what it was. The medicine's expensive. Some days I can't make it down the porch steps. Harper started skipping school, trying to help, selling drawings behind the store, cookies when she could. She thought I didn't know." She gave a breath of something that might have been a laugh, might have been regret. "One night she was gone. Left a note. Said she couldn't let the dog starve." Lucas leaned forward slightly. "Do you know where she went?" Mavis shook her head. "No. I thought maybe the shelter. Maybe someone would find her. I couldn't go after her. Couldn't even call the police. What would I say? That a child ran off with a dog because she loved it too much?" Her voice cracked. "Just once. She left him at that candy shop, didn't she?" Lucas nodded. Mavis stared at the floor. "That was her favorite place. Her parents took her there every year for her birthday. They'd buy pink ribbon candy and a single piece of fudge. She said it was where she remembered being happiest." Outside, a breeze stirred the trees. Lucas glanced toward the window, then back to the woman. "She left him with a note," he said. "Asked someone to care for him. Said he didn't do anything wrong." Mavis closed her eyes. She always blamed herself. For the crash, for me getting sick, for not being enough. She exhaled, deep and trembling. "She's just a kid," Lucas stood. "I'll find her." Mavis didn't look surprised, only tired. "If you do, tell her. Tell her it wasn't supposed to be goodbye." Lucas paused on the porch steps as he left. The wind had picked up slightly, and the sky had dimmed to a washed-out gray. In the cruiser, Atlas sat upright now, watching the house. His ears twitched as Lucas approached, and when the door opened, he didn't wait for command, just shifted to make room. As Lucas drove back toward Franklin, the dog rested his head on the seat's edge, eyes steady, like he knew what came next. And maybe he did. Some animals carry more than memory. They carry purpose. Lucas tightened his grip on the wheel. A name, a story, a direction. It wasn't much. But it was enough. Somewhere out there, a girl was trying to disappear. But she had left a trail made not of footprints, but of love. And Lucas was beginning to see it, one thread at a time. The next morning came without much light. The sky remained a dull slate, the sun hidden behind a veil that never quite lifted. Lucas pulled his jacket from the peg beside the door and stepped outside, his breath fogging instantly in the chill. Atlas followed without needing to be asked. His gait slow but steady, eyes trained on the road ahead like they already knew where it led. Lucas didn't go back to the station. He didn't call anyone for permission. There were times when the badge was a weight and times when it was a bridge. This morning, it was neither. It simply hung on his chest, silent. The truck rolled past the edge of Franklin and southward, toward Columbia, a stretch of highway flanked by fields now barren, save for low shrubs and the occasional rusted fence line. It wasn't a long drive, but it felt slow, the road unspooling like a memory. Columbia was quieter than Franklin, if such a thing was possible, a place where time seemed to rest, not just pass. The houses were smaller, older. Many leaned slightly, like they'd long ago accepted their imperfections. Lucas asked around, discreetly. A gas station attendant remembered a girl, said she'd offered to mop the bathroom in exchange for a sandwich. Another clerk at the corner store recalled a kid with tangled brown hair buying crackers with change that barely added up. Both remembered the same thing. She never asked for more than she needed, and she never came back. Finally, it was a woman in her 50s, Miss Rhonda, who ran a church thrift store, who gave him what he didn't expect. She's been staying with the Rollins family, she said. Friends of her mother's, out near Hollow Creek Road. House with the broken porch swing and the red truck that hasn't moved in years. Lucas nodded. He didn't press. Some information didn't come from pressure. It came from quiet. He found the house easily. It sat beneath a stand of bare-limbed trees, their branches casting long, finger-like shadows across the brittle yard. The porch sagged visibly. The red truck out front was, indeed, unmoved, its tires sunken into the earth like roots. A single curtain twitched as Lucas stepped from his vehicle, but no one came out to meet him. He left Atlas in the cab, not because he feared a reaction, but because something about this moment asked for solitude. He knocked once, then waited. After a long pause, the door opened a fraction. A thin man with tired eyes looked through the gap. His flannel shirt was missing buttons, and his voice was rough with sleep or reluctance. "Yeah?" Lucas removed his hat. "Officer Grant, Franklin Police. I'm not here on official business, just looking for someone." The man didn't speak, but his eyes shifted past Lucas toward the road, as if hoping the conversation might vanish if he stayed still long enough. "I'm looking for Harper Quinn," Lucas said. "I believe she's been staying here." The man sighed, rubbed his chin. "She's out back, with the goats." Lucas nodded once. "Thank you." He walked around the side of the house, boots crunching softly over fallen leaves and gravel. The backyard was little more than a patch of dirt and low fencing, but sure enough, 2 goats wandered lazily, chewing on nothing. And there, sitting cross-legged near a tree stump, was a girl. Harper. She was thinner than he'd imagined, the way children sometimes become when they've learned how to make space for others. Her coat was too small, sleeves short above her wrists. Her hair was pulled into a loose side knot, strands falling across her cheek as she stared at something in her lap. A pencil. A piece of paper. She was drawing. Lucas didn't say her name, not yet. He stepped carefully, his boots making no effort to hide the sound. She heard him, because she stilled. When she finally turned, her eyes went first to the badge, then to the man, then to the empty space behind him. "Where is he?" she asked. Her voice was small, but not scared. Lucas paused. "In the truck." Her shoulders dropped, almost imperceptibly. A tension released, but not all of it. "I left him there," she said. "I thought someone would find him." "Someone did," Lucas said. Harper turned back to her drawing. Her pencil hovered, then fell still. "I didn't want to," she whispered, "but he wouldn't eat. We had no more food. I thought, if I left him somewhere kind, someone might help. The candy shop was the last place we were happy." Lucas crouched slowly. He didn't reach for her. He didn't offer comfort. He just let the quiet settle between them like a blanket. "He waited 3 days," he said. Harper's breath caught. She didn't cry, not really, just breathed out like something inside had folded. "I thought he'd forget me," she said. "I hoped he would." Lucas shook his head slowly. He didn't. A long silence followed. Then, "Do you want to see him?" She didn't answer right away. She just nodded, once, barely. Lucas stood, walked back to the truck, and opened the door. Atlas jumped down before being called. He didn't run. He didn't bark. He walked, steady, slow, like he was afraid too much movement would break something fragile. Harper stood as he approached. When Atlas reached her, he stopped. She knelt. They touched foreheads, and for a moment, just one, the whole world felt like it had exhaled. The space between them held no sound, only breath, warm and visible in the cold. Harper knelt on the brittle grass, her fingers trembling as they slid behind Atlas's ears, down the slope of his neck, over the thin bones of his shoulder. His coat was damp from the frost, matted slightly from sleep, but it didn't matter. She pressed her face into him and stayed there, unmoving, as though she believed if she held still long enough, she might undo time. Atlas didn't make a sound. His tail moved just once, then settled. He leaned into her with his full weight. Not out of need, but permission, as if to say, "I'm here. You can lean too." Lucas stood off to the side, hands in the pockets of his coat, eyes lowered not out of awkwardness, but respect. It wasn't a moment for him. It wasn't a moment for anyone but the two who had crossed a quiet wilderness to find each other again. A small voice broke the stillness. "I thought he hated me." Lucas shook his head gently. "He waited for you every hour of every day." Harper kept her face buried in Atlas's fur, her voice so small he had to lean closer to catch it. "I couldn't watch him starve. I couldn't watch his eyes asking for more than I could give." She pulled back slowly, her face pale and tear-streaked, but steady. She looked older than 11 in that moment. Not in the lines on her skin, there were none, but in the way she held the weight of her choices without asking to be forgiven. Atlas nudged her chin gently with his nose. Then he lay down beside her, pressed close against her side, curling just slightly as though sheltering her again, as he must have done through long nights before the separation. "I told him to be brave," Harper whispered. "I said someone would come. I didn't know if it was a lie." Lucas said nothing. He let the moment fill the space around them like mist rising from thawed ground. Inside the house, behind tattered curtains, someone watched, but no one interrupted. Eventually, Harper stood, brushing the dirt from her knees. Atlas rose with her. She didn't ask questions, didn't ask what came next, just turned toward Lucas and waited. He understood. When they reached the cruiser, Harper opened the back door without hesitation. Atlas leapt in, then settled with his head resting across her lap. She looked out the window as Lucas started the engine, her hand moving absently through the dog's fur. No one spoke on the drive back. It was the kind of silence that didn't need filling, like snow falling between two people who understand enough not to move. As the town came back into view, the clouds began to break. Not fully, just enough for the light to begin working its way through, soft gold slicing across the rooftops and touching the tops of the pine trees. When they reached the cabin, Harper didn't hesitate. She stepped out, Atlas at her heel, her small backpack clutched tightly in one hand. Lucas opened the door, letting them enter first. Inside, everything was still where it had been. The folded blanket by the fire, the cup on the table, the note tucked between the pages of the book. Harper stopped near the hearth and looked around. "This was his spot," Lucas said quietly. "He waited here every night." She didn't speak, but her shoulders lifted faintly, then dropped. Atlas returned to the same place, circled once and lay down with a soft exhale. Harper stood in the center of the room for a moment. Then she sat. Not on the couch, not in the chair, on the floor next to the dog. Lucas watched her from the doorway. He didn't offer food, or plans, or explanations. Instead, he walked to the kitchen, poured water into a mug, and placed it beside the fireplace. Then he turned and stepped outside, leaving the door ajar behind him. The cold bit at his face, but he didn't mind. He leaned on the railing of the porch and stared into the woods. Something in his chest had shifted. Not loosened exactly. Not yet, but softened. Behind him, from inside the cabin, came a sound not heard in weeks. Laughter, not loud, not free, but real. Lucas didn't turn. He closed his eyes and let it find its place in the silence. And inside the cabin, the girl and the dog sat together, still carrying the weight of all that had come before, but no longer carrying it alone. Lucas never expected the house to feel different. But it did. Not louder, not brighter, just warmer, as if something long dormant had quietly begun to breathe again. Harper didn't say much that first week. She rose early, never asked for breakfast, never turned on the lights unless the room was too dark to see. She moved with the careful rhythm of someone who had lived in borrowed places, unsure which chair was safe to sit in, which drawer was hers to open. Lucas didn't push. He simply made coffee each morning, added an extra slice of toast on the plate, and left a small note by the sugar jar. Nothing dramatic, just a few words. Let me know if the heater's too loud. Atlas didn't sleep well. Check on him. Firewood stacked if you want to help. She never answered in person, but he began finding folded scraps tucked under his mug, taped to the edge of the counter, slipped inside his book. The heater's fine. I gave Atlas another blanket. You're almost out of peanut butter. Each note in her cramped, careful writing was a thread stretched from one heart to another. Nothing grand, nothing forced. But the silence between them had begun to fill, not with talk, but with presence. In the evenings, Lucas started reading aloud. Not to Harper exactly, just into the room. Children's books at first, then a worn novel from the shelf he hadn't touched in years. He never checked if she was listening, but sometimes, when he glanced over, he'd see her seated against the wall, legs crossed, eyes half-lidded, fingers absently stroking Atlas's fur. She never asked for more, but she never left the room either. Atlas stayed between them, sometimes literally. He slept beside Harper's bed at night and followed Lucas out to the porch in the morning. He moved slower now, but with a kind of peaceful weight, like a stone that had finally settled where it belonged. One afternoon, a caseworker from Franklin's child welfare office came by. Lucas had filed the request days earlier, but hadn't expected such a swift response. The woman, gray coat, clipboard, voice kind but practiced, walked through the cabin quietly, asking a few questions, taking a few notes. Harper stood by the window the entire time, arms folded tightly, gaze fixed outward. I'm not her parent, Lucas said. Not asking to be. But she doesn't have another safe place right now. And I do. That should be enough for now. The woman paused, then looked toward Harper. We'll need a temporary guardianship form. You'll have to register her with the school district. Medical checkups, basic structure, but yes, it's enough. For now. She left the paperwork. Lucas didn't read it right away. That night, he found another note on the fridge. Thank you for not making me explain things. It was signed simply with an H. Nothing more. Days passed, then weeks, and with them, small rituals began to form like frost patterns across glass. Delicate, quiet, unmistakable. Each morning, Harper filled Atlas's bowl with water before doing anything else. She whispered something to him each time, though Lucas never caught the words. Lucas, for his part, found himself pausing more often, letting moments linger, watching Harper braid her hair without saying anything, waiting until she looked up to hand her a napkin, sitting outside with a thermos, letting her join him when she was ready, not when he asked. Once he saw her slip a folded drawing into Atlas's collar. Later, when the dog lay curled beside the fire, Lucas gently pulled it out. It was a sketch of the candy shop, the awning, the brick steps, a small figure sitting with a dog. No names, no faces, just lines and shadows and a stillness that felt sacred. He didn't mention it. He just left the drawing taped beside the fireplace. One Sunday morning, Harper stood at the counter holding a tattered backpack. "Can I go to school again?" she asked. Lucas looked up. "Of course. Whenever you're ready." "I think I'm ready now." They sat together that afternoon, filling out forms. She didn't ask him to sign anything, but when she handed him the pen, he understood. Later that week, as dawn filtered through the cabin's windows, Harper stood by the door dressed in an oversized hoodie, her backpack slung over one shoulder. Atlas sat beside her, alert, ears high, as if ready to escort her all the way to class. Lucas waited in the truck. She didn't look back until she reached the end of the walk. Then she turned slightly, just enough, and Lucas raised a hand, slow, steady. She nodded. That evening, she returned with a stack of textbooks and a new note stuck on the fridge. "I don't hate reading as much as I thought." Atlas was asleep by the fire. Lucas read anyway, and Harper stayed in the room, again. Not every story ends in reunion. Not every wound heals clean. But some lives, when given the quiet to breathe and the space to stay, begin again. Not in triumph, but in trust. They were not a family, not yet, but they were something worth holding on to. By the time the next winter rolled around, Franklin had already woven the story into its quiet traditions. Not as a headline, not as a myth, but as a whisper that moved from mouth to mouth, at barbershops, over checkerboards, between the clicks of knitting needles at church basements. The story of the dog who waited in the rain, of the note, of the officer who didn't turn away, of the little girl who came back. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew what had been salvaged that December. The town council never held a vote, but one morning, Henry Dawson found himself unlocking the door of the shop and noticing a small bronze plaque being installed near the step. A local artist, retired from the university, had sculpted it over several months, just a small figure of a German shepherd, sitting, watching the door. The plaque beneath it simply read, "He waited." Henry ran his fingers over the cold metal, then stepped inside and turned on the lights. That afternoon, Harper stood in front of the sculpture for a long time, her mittened hand resting lightly on Atlas's head. She didn't say anything. Lucas stood a few paces back, coffee in hand, letting her have the silence. Around them, the town moved at its usual December pace. Wool coats, fogged breath, the smell of wood smoke curling out from chimneys. Children came and went. Some stopped to look, some didn't. But no one touched the statue. Harper didn't cry. She hadn't cried since that first day back. But Lucas saw the way her shoulders lifted slightly with each breath, the way her knees stayed locked, like she was holding something steady inside. "Is this supposed to be the end?" she asked suddenly. Lucas took a sip of his coffee before answering. "I don't think stories like this have an end. Just quieter chapters." She nodded, but didn't look away. "It still feels like part of me is back there." He didn't ask where there was. He just let her speak, the way he'd learned to. I mean, he waited, right? Atlas waited. But I left. Lucas stepped closer, crouched beside her. You did what you thought was right. That's not the same as leaving. Harper didn't respond, but she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small piece of folded paper. She tucked it gently beneath the statue's paw, like an offering. No one asked what it said. Later that week, on the anniversary of Atlas's arrival at Dawson's, the townsfolk gathered in quiet acknowledgement. No speeches, no parade. Just candles placed along the storefront window and a single red and white box of ginger candy left on the step. Harper had chosen it herself. Lucas didn't take pictures, neither did anyone else. Some moments weren't meant to be shared, just held. By now, Harper had settled into her own routines. School was still hard, too many voices, too many eyes, but she'd found her rhythm. She sat in the back, rarely raised her hand, but never missed a day. The teachers knew better than to pry. They gave her space, and in return, she offered quiet diligence, a quiet smile when no one was watching. Every morning, Atlas walked with her to the school gate. He sat until she disappeared inside, and every afternoon, he was there before the final bell rang. The kids started calling him the Shadow. They said he could tell who needed him most, and sat beside those having a bad day. The school counselor once found him curled next to a boy who hadn't spoken in 3 weeks. The boy whispered into Atlas's fur that day. No one heard what he said, but he talked after that. Lucas still kept the house quiet. He hadn't changed much, but he kept a second toothbrush in the holder now, and a spare blanket folded on the end of Harper's bed. Sometimes he came home to find a new drawing taped to the fridge, usually of trees or animals, or a small cabin in the woods with smoke trailing from the chimney. He never asked for explanations. He just nodded when he saw them. One night in late December, snow began to fall. Thick and slow, like someone had shaken the sky gently. Harper stood at the window in her pajamas, the sleeves hanging past her hands. Atlas lay nearby, tail thumping once at the sound of her breath fogging the glass. Lucas stood behind her, arms crossed. I think I believe in quiet miracles now, she said, almost to herself. He nodded, unsure whether she wanted a response. She turned, eyes steady. Not the kind with angels and trumpets. Just someone not turning away. He met her gaze. That kind. She walked over, sat beside Atlas and leaned into his side. The fire crackled. The snow deepened. Outside, the town of Franklin slept beneath a soft hush, its streets dusted in white. The statue of a waiting dog catching flakes on its bronze head. Inside, no one said anything more that night. They didn't need to. Some endings don't close a door. They open a quiet place to stay. Some dogs don't wait for commands. They wait for hearts to come home. Some children don't need fixing. They need someone who stays when staying feels inconvenient. And some stories, like this one, don't end with triumphs or perfect resolutions. They end with quiet routines, half-spoken gestures, and love that shows up at the door, day after day, even when it's raining. In the soft silence between a girl who left and a dog who waited, a man who thought he had nothing left found something worth showing up for. So maybe the lesson isn't in the rescue, but in the waiting, in the patience to let someone come back in their own time, in the courage to open your door even when you don't know who's knocking. If this story touched something in you, I'd love to hear it. Have you ever waited, or been the one someone waited for? Have you ever been saved, not by words, but by presence? Share your story in the comments, about a dog, a person, or a moment that reminded you what it means to belong. You don't need to write much, just enough for someone else to feel a little less alone tonight. And if you stayed with us until the end, thank you. The world needs more people like you, people who stay.